Okay, now we're on to Casablancas, okay? Casablancas in the 1980s, the beginning of the end. For his part, John Casablancas enjoyed continued success through most of the 1980s, building the largest and most profitable modeling agency in the world. But beneath the glitz and glamour of his supermodels and lifestyle lurked a much darker reality. Once his agency was established, Casablancas embarked on creating a kind of hierarchy, a multi-tiered system that his prospects would have to navigate in order to be signed. Casablancas would ultimately turn over the day-to-day control of his agency to his business partner and focus most of his time and energy on his New Faces division, meeting dozens of aspiring models a day in the comfort of his corner office away from prying eyes. These fucking pervs. It was in this private setting that Casablancas began the tradition of weighing and measuring girls, which soon became widespread throughout the industry. It was a practice that served the dual purpose of allowing agencies to closely monitor any weight gain and create a pretense for agents to meet with young models alone in their offices and require them to strip nude. The tier system incentivized doing whatever it took to get to the top, a perch which 99% of the girls scouted and brought before Casablancas would never reach. There were only a handful of models who could wake up for nothing less than $10,000 a day after all, but the possibility was tantalizing. And Casablancas was a skilled groomer who lavished every one of his models with the attention and made them feel like they had potential to reach the top. This created a power dynamic that had previously not existed. Among models, it was understood that John Casablancas could make you a star. It was also understood that he could ruin you. The system worked for a while, but it was foiled by the fact that the playboys, in particular John Casablancas, were used to living by a different set of rules and never being held accountable. None of these men were shy about their behavior, and the fact that they were betting models as young as 12 on a routine basis was well known. But in the 1980s, the cultural tide started to turn against them. I remember this. This is why I've always loathed him. I remember this. I grew up in this time. In the 80s, I was growing into a young woman. I was in my teens and late teens. I was born in 70. So in 80, I was 10. But as in 85, I was 15 and I was paying attention. I mean, I'd already been in a mental hospital, group home, and I was already living on my own in 86. So I remember all of this stuff. This is why I hate him, and I always knew he was a pedo. Of course he was. With increased awareness of child sexual abuse, both its alarming prevalence and its devastating effects on victims, attitudes began to change, and the public became less tolerant of famous men and their dalliances with children. And soon enough, John Casablancas and his fellow playboys would find themselves embroiled in increasingly distasteful scandals involving underage girls. Very young girls. In 1984, John Casablancas met the then 14-year-old Stephanie Seymour at his newly launched Look of the Year contest for Elite. Casablancas selected Seymour as the local winner, but declared her a bit too underdeveloped for his personal taste. If I looked at anyone with interest, it was her mom, he said, and she was shipped back off to Florida to start her sophomore year in high school. Throughout the year, Seymour continued to write to Casablancas. The kid was delightful, he said of her correspondence. She would send little letters, and when you opened the letter, little silver stars would fall out. And Casablancas responded to her correspondence personally, urging her to come back to New York and join his agency once school let out. At the end of her sophomore year, she did just that, and by this time she was fully up to Casablancas' exhausting standards. By that time, her body was extraordinary. She was long and thin, and the shapes were where they had to be, and her face was gorgeous, with this innocent little child voice, he said in an interview, explaining his lust over a girl young enough to be his grandchild. On the night of her 16th birthday, John Casablancas threw Stephanie Seymour a party at a cocaine-fueled nightclub in Milan, presenting her with a goblet of milk and a plate of cookies. 1 week later, he would move in with her. Casablancas' affinity for very young girls was not a secret. In fact, it was legendary within the fashion industry and the social scene in New York City long before it became public knowledge. I really have a bit of Pygmalion syndrome, he admitted in an interview before discussing how he encouraged one of his 17-year-old new face girls to lose weight by telling her that he was really turned off by her body. The Pygmalion effect or Rosenthal effect. is the phenomenon whereby higher expectations lead to an increase in performance. The effect is named after the Greek myth of Pygmalion, a sculptor who fell in love with the statue he had carved. By the time New York Magazine did a front-page profile of him in 1988, Casablancas' reputation for betting on models was established and begrudgingly accepted, a price to pay in exchange for his genius within the New York social scene. But the expose came as a shock to many outside the bubble. John Casablancas would soon find out that he was not as untouchable as he thought. In the article, which ran under the title Girl Crazy, Casablancas was portrayed as a champagne-guzzling pervert, singularly dedicated to the new look department of the elite, where he spent his days ogling the scantily clad, sometimes naked bodies of teenage girls. In light of Donald Trump's more alarming comments and decisions around his daughter Ivanka, this quote stands out. Casablancas talked about his 17-year-old daughter, Cecile. He said Cecile had been solicited by a photographer last summer on a beach in Ibiza. The photographer asked her to pose in a bikini, and Casablancas raced over to try to get a $2,000 fee for the shot. She's got a great little body, he told his models. Another quote that brings a chuckle and a nod of recognition in this story is Casablancas' bizarre pride over never having changed a diaper. Donald Trump would make similar boasts in a Howard Stern interview a few years later. Compelling proof this is not, but I do believe it's a hint at the kind of Don Juan persona that Don, far from a Juan, actually a dejected, balding husband with a crumbling empire. Girl Crazy marked the beginning of John Casablancas' downfall. The article became a huge scandal and reverberated far beyond the modeling industry and into the mainstream press. It was especially visible in New York City, where Elite had its headquarters and where Casablancas lived and was an active part of the social scene. Certainly, without a doubt, it would have gotten around to Donald Trump. But the scandal did not end there, nor did it begin. Less than a month earlier, 60 Minutes aired a primetime special on the abuses of underage girls in the modeling agency. Investigative reporter Craig Pies portrayed the modeling industry as infested with agents who were notorious hustlers and playboys. His report revealed that both Claude Haddad, the head of European scouting for Ford, and Ford's Paris-based agent Jean-Luc Brunel have been accused of horrific sexual misconduct by many models. The special aired the interviews of dozens of women who accused both Brunel and Haddad of a litany of crimes, ranging from racist invective towards black models to violent rape. And in fact, the hidden camera footage captured in filming the special caught it all, from Xavier lamenting about N-word models to Haddad chuckling about drugging and 13-year-old girls. According to Model, at a retreat soon after one two-punch delivered by the coverage, Haddad, Jean-Luc Brunel, and Casablancas were once again overheard, albeit not taped this time around, laughing about their crimes. Alternatively, they were angry when confronted by interim scout manager Trudy Tapscott. "I'm a man and I have needs. I will not apologize for that," Casablancas is said to have declared. There was, to be fair, fallout from these reports. Brunel and Haddad were condemned by Eileen Ford, and Casablancas never fully regained his public reputation. But the public and the insular world of fashion are very different animals, and within the latter, the only repercussions any of the men faced was in retribution for airing the industry's dirty laundry with their sloppiness. Haddad and Brunel kept their jobs, albeit not in an official capacity, and while Casablancas was removed from his official role as head of the New Faces division of Elite, where he had unrestrained access and influence over the youngest and most impressionable girls represented by his agency, he didn't go very far. His unofficial capacity was far-reaching, and his behaviors were explained away by his replacements. One of the agents taking his place was Trudy Tapscott, the same woman who had tried unsuccessfully to confront John after his forced retirement. While initially she was furious at Casablancas, less than a year later she had softened her stance. Quoted in Model, she stated, "People in this business use their power to manipulate people in ways that are unfair." But she nonetheless told the many parents who were concerned about Casablancas, who still retained an unofficial role in the division, that he was not a manipulator. "My answer is that no one ever did anything they didn't want," she stated. "I'm amazed at how these girls act in certain situations. They know more about making passes at